Edward Miller heard the screaming before he even reached the stairs. Not crying, screaming. His son. Terrified. He ran. Took the stairs 3 at a time, his heart pounding in his chest. Julian. He threw open the nursery door and froze. His 3-year-old son sat on the floor in his yellow shirt, tears streaming down his face, shaking the arm of the woman lying beside him. Sandra, the nanny, collapsed, not moving. Edward dropped to his knees. His hands were shaking, his mind was racing. What happened? What the hell happened? He checked Julian, first red marks on his throat, tears everywhere, but breathing. Then Sandra, pale, unconscious, pulse faint. 911. My son's nanny collapsed. My son is, please, just send someone. He looked around, trying to understand. There was something on the floor. A toy wheel, wet, a damp cloth, a thermometer, still blinking. And then the question hit him like a punch to the chest. Did she hurt him? His phone was still at his ear when he heard footsteps rushing down the hall. Vivian Crowe, the head housekeeper, appeared in the doorway, hand over her chest. Mr. Miller, oh my God, what happened? I don't know, Edward said. His voice was barely holding together. I heard him screaming and I found them like this. Vivian's eyes moved from Sandra to Julian, then back to Edward. Her voice dropped, careful and quiet. Sir, I've been worried about her. The paramedics arrived. One team worked on Sandra, the other checked Julian. Sir, has your son been choking? Edward's blood went cold. What? There's bruising on his throat. Someone performed the Heimlich. Recently. Edward looked at Sandra's unconscious body being lifted onto a stretcher. She saved him? But then the other paramedic spoke, his voice low and uncertain. There's a mark on her wrist. Looks like an injection site. The room went silent. Vivian's voice came soft from behind him. Mr. Miller, if she's been hiding something. Edward couldn't finish the thought. They carried Sandra out. Her hand slipped off the gurney. Julian cried for her, and Edward stood there, staring at the empty room, realizing he didn't know anything at all. Before we begin, like, subscribe, and tell me where in the world you're watching from, because sometimes the people we overlook are the ones God sent to save us. The ambulance lights painted the street red and blue. Edward sat in the back holding Julian, who wouldn't let go of his shirt. The boy's fingers were still sticky with tears. His throat was raw from crying, but he was breathing. That's what mattered. In the other ambulance, Sandra was hooked up to machines that beeped too fast, then too slow, then stopped altogether before starting again. The paramedic working on her kept looking at his partner with that face. The one that says this doesn't make sense. The emergency room was chaos. Doctors swarmed around Sandra. Nurses checked Julian over and over, shining lights in his eyes, listening to his chest, asking Edward questions he couldn't answer. Has he been sick? I don't know. Any allergies? I don't know. When did he last eat? Edward looked at his son and realized he didn't know anything. He'd been in meetings all day, closing deals, building empires, while his son was home, choking. A doctor came over, young guy with kind eyes. Your son's going to be fine, Mr. Miller. Whoever did the Heimlich knew what they were doing. Saved his life. Edward nodded. He couldn't speak. But I need to ask who's been caring for him today. Sandra, the nanny. The doctor glanced toward the trauma bay where they were working on her. She's the one who collapsed? Yes. Do you know if she has any medical conditions? Edward shook his head. She never said anything. The doctor wrote something down. We'll know more soon. An hour passed. Then, 2. Vivian showed up with a bag of Julian's things, his blanket, his stuffed bear, a change of clothes. She'd thought of everything. She always did. How is he? She asked, sitting beside Edward in the waiting room. He's okay. Scared. Won't talk. Vivian looked at Julian, who was curled up in Edward's lap, staring at nothing. Poor baby. This must have been so frightening for him. Edward didn't respond. He was watching the doors where they'd taken Sandra. Mr. Miller, Vivian said gently, I don't want to overstep, but has Sandra seemed herself lately? Edward looked at her. What do you mean? I've noticed she's been tired, really tired. Some days she could barely make it through Julian's bedtime routine. I thought maybe she wasn't sleeping well, or... Vivian trailed off, like she didn't want to say more. Or what? I don't know. I've been worried. That's all. Before Edward could respond, a doctor came through the doors. Older woman, grey hair pulled back, the kind of face that's seen everything. Mr. Miller, Edward stood up. Yes, how is she? She's stable, but we need to run more tests. What happened to her? The doctor hesitated. Her heart went into arrhythmia, irregular rhythm, very dangerous. We've stabilized her for now, but what? She has a condition, mitral valve prolapse. It's manageable with medication and monitoring, but under extreme physical stress. Like performing the Heimlich, Edward said. Exactly. It can trigger episodes like this. Has she ever mentioned chest pain, shortness of breath, fatigue? Edward shook his head slowly. Never. The doctor's expression shifted, something between concern and sadness. Mr. Miller, this isn't something that just appeared. She's had symptoms for months, maybe longer. The question is, why didn't she get help? Edward didn't have an answer. Can I see her? He asked. She's still unconscious, but when she wakes up, yes. Vivian drove them home that night. Julian fell asleep in the car, his head against the window. Edward sat in the back beside him, watching the city lights blur past. What if she knew? Vivian said quietly from the front seat. About her heart. Edward looked up. What? What if she knew she was sick and didn't tell you? What if she put Julian at risk because she was too proud to ask for help? Edward didn't answer, but the thought settled in his chest like a stone. When they got home, the nursery was exactly how he'd left it. The toy wheel still on the floor, the damp cloth, the thermometer. Vivian picked up Julian, carried him to his room. Edward stood in the doorway watching. I can stay tonight, Vivian offered. Help with Julian, in case you need to go back to the hospital. Thank you. She nodded. Then, as she was leaving, Mr. Miller, I know this is hard, but you have to think about what's best for Julian. If Sandra can't be trusted to tell you the truth about her health, can she be trusted with your son? Edward stood there long after she left, staring at that blue plastic wheel, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. Sandra woke up to white walls and the smell of disinfectant. Her chest hurt. Her head was pounding. There were wires everywhere, machines beeping beside her. For a second, she didn't remember. Then it all came rushing back. Julian, the choking, his face turning blue, the toy wheel, her chest locking up. She tried to sit up, gasping. Julian. A nurse rushed in. Miss Glover, please, you need to stay still. Where's Julian? Is he okay? Please, I need to know. The child is fine. He's home. You need to rest. Sandra fell back against the pillow, tears sliding down her face. He's okay. Thank God, he's okay. But something felt wrong. The nurse wasn't looking at her the same way nurses usually did. There was something careful in her voice, something distant. How long have I been here? Sandra asked. About 12 hours. 12 hours. And no one had come. The doctor came in an hour later, not the kind one from the ER, a different woman, colder. Miss Glover, I'm Dr. Hughes. I'm a cardiologist. Sandra nodded. You have a heart condition, mitral valve prolapse. It's serious, and it's been untreated. Under the kind of stress you experienced yesterday performing CPR, the Heimlich, your heart couldn't handle it. Sandra closed her eyes. She'd known something was wrong for months, the chest pains, the dizziness, but she couldn't afford to know, couldn't afford to stop working. Why didn't you get help? Dr. Hughes asked. Sandra's voice came out small. I couldn't lose my job. The doctor studied her for a long moment. Then she wrote something on her chart and left. Late afternoon, the door opened again. Sandra looked up, hoping, praying it was Edward. Or Julian. Anyone. It was Vivian. She walked in slowly, hands folded in front of her, that same concerned look on her face. Sandra, oh honey, how are you feeling? Sandra didn't know what to say. I'm okay. Is Julian? He's fine. A little shaken up, but fine. Vivian sat down in the chair beside the bed. Mr. Miller asked me to check on you. He didn't come himself. The words hung there, unspoken. Sandra, Vivian said gently, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Sandra's stomach tightened. Did you know? About your heart? Sandra hesitated. I had some symptoms, but you couldn't tell anyone. Vivian finished for her, nodding slowly. Because you were afraid of losing your job. Yes, Vivian sighed, like she understood. like she felt bad about what she was about to say. Sandra, you put Julian at risk. What if you'd collapsed while you were driving him somewhere? What if he'd been in the bath? What if— I saved his life, Sandra said, her voice breaking. I know you did, honey. I know. But Mr. Miller, he's scared. He's a father. He's asking himself if he can trust you now. The words hit Sandra like a slap. He doesn't trust me? Vivian reached out, touched Sandra's hand. He just needs time to process everything, to figure out what's best for Julian. Sandra pulled her hand away. I would never hurt that boy. Never. I believe you, Vivian said softly. But belief isn't the same as trust. And right now, Mr. Miller doesn't know what to believe. She stood up, smoothed her skirt. Get some rest, Sandra. We'll figure this out. And then she was gone. Sandra lay there in the silence, staring at the ceiling. Julian was home, safe, alive, and she was here, alone, blamed for the very thing she'd almost died trying to stop. 3 days later, they told Sandra she could go home. Not that anyone was waiting for her. No calls, no visitors, just the nurses doing their rounds and the doctor checking her chart with that same careful distance. She was sitting on the edge of the hospital bed, trying to tie her shoes with hands that still shook, when the phone rang. The nurse handed it to her. It's for you. Sandra's heart jumped. Edward. Maybe it's Edward. Hello? Miss Glover, this is Rachel from Mr. Miller's office. Not Edward. His assistant. Sandra's throat tightened. Yes? Mr. Miller wanted me to let you know we've processed your final paycheck. 2 months. Severance has been included. It should be in your account by end of day. Final paycheck. The words didn't make sense at first. Then they did. All at once. Wait, I'm fired. A pause. Professional. Practiced. Your employment has been terminated. Effective immediately. Your belongings from your quarters have been packed and will be delivered to your address on file. Sandra couldn't breathe. Can I at least say goodbye to Julian? Another pause. Longer this time. Mr. Miller thinks it's best for Julian's stability if we make a clean break. I'm sure you understand. No. She didn't understand. She didn't understand any of this. Miss Glover? Are you still there? Sandra hung up. She sat there holding the phone, staring at nothing. The room was too bright, too clean, too empty. A nurse knocked softly. Miss Glover? Your mother's here. Lorraine walked in carrying a small bag with fresh clothes. She was 63, with tired eyes and hands that never stopped moving. When she saw Sandra's face, she knew. Baby. What happened? Sandra couldn't say it out loud. If she said it, it would be real. Her mother sat down beside her, took her hand. Tell me. They fired me, Mama. Lorraine's jaw tightened. After you saved that boy's life? They don't see it that way. Then they're blind. Sandra shook her head. I can't fight this. I don't have the money, the time, the energy. Her voice cracked. I have to focus on Marcus. At the mention of her brother's name, Lorraine looked away. How is he? Sandra asked. The same. Asking about you every day. Trying to be strong. Sandra closed her eyes. Marcus, 19 years old, fighting leukemia. The only reason she'd taken this job in the first place. Her phone buzzed. A text from the hospital billing Marcus's next treatment. Denied by insurance. Balance due, $47,000. Sandra stared at the number until it blurred. The severance Edward gave her was $8,400. It wouldn't even cover 2 months of Marcus's care. Sandra, her mother said gently, we'll figure it out. We always do. But Sandra wasn't sure that was true anymore. The taxi dropped her off in Queens. Her studio apartment looked smaller than she remembered. The heater rattled. The windows were cracked, paint peeling off the walls. Marcus was on the couch, a blanket wrapped around his thin frame. He'd lost more hair since she'd seen him last. His skin was pale, almost grey, but when he saw her, he smiled. Sandy, you're home. She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him, careful not to hold too tight. He felt so fragile, like he might break. I'm home, she whispered. Are you okay? They wouldn't tell me what happened. Sandra pulled back, forcing a smile. I'm fine, just tired. Marcus studied her face. He'd always been able to read her. You're lying. I'm not. What did they do to you? Sandra looked away. She couldn't tell him, couldn't put this weight on him too. Her phone buzzed again. Another bill, then another. She opened her laptop, typed, "Caregiver jobs, NYC, immediate hire." Every posting asked the same questions. Previous employer reference? Reason for leaving? She closed the laptop. Outside, sirens wailed. The city kept moving. The world kept spinning. And Sandra sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by bills she couldn't pay, staring at a future she couldn't see. Marcus fell asleep on the couch, and for the first time since the nursery floor, Sandra let herself cry. 2 weeks passed. Edward couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Sandra's face, the way she'd looked, lying on that floor, the way Julian had been shaking her arm, crying for her to wake up. He'd done the right thing, hadn't he? Protecting his son, putting Julian's safety first. So why did it feel so wrong? Julian wasn't eating. The new nanny, Amber, Vivian's niece, was perfectly qualified, certified in pediatric care, great references. But every time she walked into the room, Julian turned away. He didn't cry, didn't throw tantrums. He just disappeared inside himself. At night, Edward would find him standing at the window, staring out at nothing. "Hey, buddy, what are you looking at?" Julian wouldn't answer. Edward tried everything. New toys, ice cream for breakfast, cartoons. Nothing worked. One night, he sat on the edge of Julian's bed and asked the question he'd been avoiding. "Do you miss her, Sandra?" Julian's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't speak. Edward pulled him close. "I know, son, I know." But he didn't know. Not really. It was 2 a.m. When Edward went to his study, he poured himself a drink, sat at his desk, stared at the wall. He kept thinking about what the paramedic had said. Someone performed the Heimlich. Someone saved his life. Sandra had saved Julian. There was no question about that. But the injection mark, the heart condition she'd hidden, the fact that she'd put herself in a position where she could collapse at any moment with his son in her care. Edward stopped. Why hadn't she told him? The question had been eating at him for days. Sandra had worked for him for 2 years. She'd been nothing but reliable, loving, present. If she had a heart condition, why keep it secret? Unless she was afraid. Edward sat up straighter. Afraid of what? He opened his laptop, logged into the security system, found the nursery footage from that day. He'd watched it once before, in the hospital, but only pieces. Now he needed to see everything. The timestamp read 2:47 p.m. Sandra and Julian were playing blocks, laughing. She was singing something, her voice soft and gentle. Julian was clapping. Then Julian put something in his mouth. Sandra's face changed. She moved fast, faster than Edward had ever seen anyone move. Grabbed Julian. Back blows. Heimlich. Once, twice, 3 times. The toy wheel flew across the room. Julian started crying. Sandra held him, checking him over, kissing his forehead. Then she put him down, carefully, safely, and collapsed. Edward watched her hand reach out toward Julian even as she fell, watched her make sure he was far enough away that she wouldn't land on him. She was protecting him, until the very last second. Edward rewound the footage, watched it again, and that's when he saw it. 3 minutes after Sandra collapsed, the door opened. Vivian walked in. She stood there, looked at Sandra, looked at Julian crying, and walked away. Edward's blood went cold. He checked the timestamp. Vivian had seen them, and she'd left them there. For 7 minutes. 7 minutes before she came running to Edward, pretending she'd just discovered them. Edward sat back in his chair, his heart pounding. Why? He scrolled back through earlier footage. Days before. Weeks. There Sandra, talking to Vivian, gesturing at the toy bin, her face serious, Vivian waving her off. There Sandra, looking exhausted, sitting on the floor with Julian, rubbing her chest. There Vivian watching Sandra with an expression Edward had never seen before. Not concern. Calculation. Edward closed the laptop. His hands were shaking. Something was very, very wrong. And he'd been too blind to see it. Edward couldn't leave it alone. The next morning, he called his assistant. "I need Sandra's personnel file. Everything. Sir, she's no longer." "I know. Just get it." The file arrived an hour later. Edward spread it across his desk. Performance reviews, time cards, medical requests. The reviews were perfect. 2 years of excellence. Punctual, loving with Julian, goes above and beyond. Then, 3 months ago, The notes changed. Appears fatigued, late to morning duties, requested excessive time off. All signed by Vivian Crow. Edward frowned. He pulled up the digital time cards, cross-referenced the dates. Sandra hadn't been late. Not once. She'd arrived 30 minutes early every single day. What the hell? He kept digging. Medical appointment requests. 5 of them over the past 6 months, all for cardiology appointments. Every single one had been deleted before reaching his approval queue. Edward's chest tightened. He checked the system logs. Same user ID on every deletion. Vivian. Edward stood up, walked to the window. His reflection stared back at him, tired, angry, ashamed. Sandra had been trying to get help for months, and someone had been stopping her. He picked up his phone, called his attorney. Harold, I need you to find someone for me, a private investigator, the best. What's this about? I need to know everything about my head housekeeper, and I need to know what really happened to Sandra Glover. 2 days later, Edward sat in his study with a man named Martin Chase, former FBI. Sharp eyes. No nonsense. Martin slid a folder across the desk. Vivian Crow, 58 years old. Been with your family for 23 years. I know all that. Did you know she was fired from 2 previous households before your father hired her? Edward looked up. What? Terminated for inappropriate conduct with staff. Your father's background check never caught it because the companies she listed as references didn't exist. Edward's jaw tightened. Martin opened another folder. I pulled the IT logs from your home server. Vivian accessed Sandra's medical appointment requests 47 times over 18 months. Every time Sandra tried to schedule a doctor's visit, Vivian deleted it. Why would she do that? Martin pulled out another document. Personnel files. Vivian's been trying to get Sandra replaced for over a year. She recommended her niece Amber multiple times. Edward felt sick. There's more, Martin said quietly. He pulled out a small evidence bag. Inside was a toy. Blue plastic wheel. This is the toy that caused your son to choke. It was recalled 6 months ago. Choking hazard. I checked your household purchase records. Vivian ordered it 3 days before the incident. The room went silent. She tried to kill my son? I don't know if she meant to hurt him, Martin said carefully. But she created the conditions. Put the toy where Sandra couldn't miss it. Waited for something to go wrong. Edward stood up, walked to the window. His hands were shaking. Where's Sandra now? Martin hesitated. Queens, studio apartment. Her brother's staying with her. He's sick. Leukemia. From what I can tell, she's been supporting his treatment. That's why she never said anything about her heart. She couldn't afford to lose the job. Edward closed his eyes. God, what have I done? Find her, he said quietly. I need to see her. Mr. Miller, find her. Martin nodded and left. Edward stood alone in his study, staring at the evidence spread across his desk. All this time, he'd thought he was protecting Julian. But the real danger had been right in front of him, and he'd been too blind to see it. Sandra woke up at 4 a.m. Her chest hurt, but she ignored it. She had a shift at the convenience store starting at 5, then the coffee shop at 9. If she was lucky, she'd make enough for Marcus's pain medication by the end of the week. She looked over at the couch. Marcus was asleep, his breathing shallow and ragged. He'd gotten worse. The cancer was spreading, and without the next round of treatment, the doctors said he had maybe 3 months. 3 months. Sandra got dressed in the dark, left a note on the table, went to work. Be back tonight. Love you. The convenience store shift was brutal. Her manager kept watching her like she might collapse again. She'd fainted twice last week, once behind the register, once in the stockroom. Sandra, you okay? He asked, not unkindly. I'm fine. You don't look fine. She rang up a customer, smiled, counted change with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. At 8:47 a.m., her chest tightened, sharp pain down her left arm. She gripped the counter, breathing through it. Just get to 9. Just get to 9. The coffee shop was busier. Sandra moved on autopilot. Orders, drinks, smiles that didn't reach her eyes. A woman asked for oat milk. Sandra poured almond. The woman complained. Sandra apologized. Made it again. Her vision blurred. She reached for the counter. Missed. The last thing she heard was someone shouting her name. When she woke up, she was in an ambulance. Again. Miss Glover, can you hear me? She tried to nod. You collapsed at work. Your heart rate was dangerously irregular. We're taking you to the hospital. No, Sandra whispered. I can't afford. Ma'am, you need medical attention. Sandra closed her eyes. Let the tears come. She'd failed. Failed Marcus. Failed herself. Failed Julian. I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. The ER doctor was the same one from before. Dr. Hughes. She looked at Sandra's chart, then at Sandra, and her expression softened. You checked out against medical advice 3 weeks ago. I had to, and now you're back. Worse than before. Sandra didn't respond. Dr. Hughes pulled up a chair, sat down like she had time, like Sandra mattered. Why are you doing this to yourself? Sandra's voice broke. My brother is dying. The doctor waited. He needs treatment. $47,000. I don't have it. The severance from my last job barely covered rent and his medication. I've been working 2 jobs, but it's not enough. It's never enough. And your heart? Doesn't matter. It does matter. Not more than him. Sandra looked at the doctor, eyes red and raw. He's 19. He has his whole life ahead of him. I can't let him die. Dr. Hughes was quiet for a long moment. What if I told you there might be another way? Sandra shook her head. There's no other way. I've tried everything. The doctor stood up. Let me make a call. That night, Sandra lay in the hospital bed alone. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus's nurse. His fever spiked. We've admitted him. Street Vincent's, room 412. Sandra stared at the message. Marcus was 2 floors above her, dying, and she couldn't even walk up the stairs to hold his hand. She turned her face to the pillow and sobbed. Outside her room, Dr. Hughes was on the phone. Mr. Miller, this is Dr. Patricia Hughes. I'm a cardiologist at Mount Sinai. I treated your late wife, Catherine, before she passed. A pause. I need to talk to you about Sandra Glover. Edward stood outside Sandra's hospital room for 10 minutes before he could make himself walk in. Julian was with him. The boy had grabbed his hand in the car and wouldn't let go. Dee Dee's in there, Julian whispered. Yes. Can I see her? Edward looked down at his son. The first words he'd spoken in 2 weeks. Yes, buddy. You can see her. Sandra was staring at the ceiling when the door opened. She turned her head slowly, expecting a nurse. It wasn't a nurse. Edward Miller stood in the doorway, suit wrinkled, hair uncombed, eyes red like he hadn't slept in days, and beside him, holding his hand, was Julian. Sandra's breath caught. Julian. The little boy's face crumpled. He pulled away from his father and ran. Edward tried to stop him. Julian, wait, she's hurt. But Julian didn't care. He climbed onto the bed, careful around the wires, and buried his face in Sandra's chest. Dee Dee, he sobbed. I missed you. I missed you so much. Sandra wrapped her arms around him, tears streaming down her face. Oh, baby, I missed you too. Edward stood frozen in the doorway, watching his son cling to the woman he'd thrown away. After a while, Julian fell asleep against Sandra's side. She stroked his hair gently, not looking at Edward. The silence stretched between them like broken glass. Finally, Edward spoke. I'm sorry. Sandra didn't respond. I should have listened. I should have seen. I should have. His voice broke. I'm so sorry, Sandra. She looked at him then. Really, looked at him. Why are you here? Dr. Hughes called me. She told me about your brother, about what you've been going through. Sandra's jaw tightened. I don't need your pity. It's not pity. Then what is it? Edward stepped closer. His hands were shaking. It's shame. It's guilt. It's me trying to understand how I got everything so wrong. Sandra looked away. Edward sat down in the chair beside the bed. I know what Vivian did. I know about the deleted appointments, the falsified reports, the toy she planted. I know she saw you collapsed and walked away. His voice dropped. I know everything, and I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. Sandra closed her eyes. Tears slipped down her cheeks. You grabbed me, she whispered. That day, in the nursery. You looked at me like I was nothing. I know. You threw me out like trash. I know. You didn't even let me say goodbye to him. Edward's voice cracked. I know, and I will regret that for the rest of my life. Sandra looked down at Julian, sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. He wouldn't eat, Edward said quietly. Wouldn't talk, wouldn't sleep. The new nanny tried everything, but he just disappeared. I thought I was protecting him by keeping you away, but I was destroying him. Sandra stroked Julian's hair. I have something for you, Edward said. He pulled out a folder, set it on the bedside table. What is it? Marcus's treatment. Sloane Kettering accepted him into their experimental program. Full ride, no cost, starting tomorrow. Sandra's heart stopped. What? It's done. The paperwork's filed. They're expecting him. I can't accept that. I can't. Yes, you can. Edward's eyes met hers. You saved my son's life while your heart was failing. This is the least I can do. Sandra stared at the folder. At this impossible gift. Why? She whispered. Edward looked at Julian, then back at her. Because you showed up. Even when it was killing you. You showed up for him. His voice broke. And I threw you away for it. Sandra had surgery 3 days later. Valve replacement. High risk, but necessary. Edward paid for everything. Private room. Best surgeons. He didn't ask permission. Just did it. The morning of the surgery, Julian refused to leave her side. I want to stay with Dee Dee. Edward knelt down beside him. She'll be back soon. Buddy, I promise. You promised before, Julian said quietly, and she went away. The words cut deeper than any blade. Sandra reached for Julian's hand. Your daddy's telling the truth this time. I'm coming back. You promise? I promise. Julian hugged her carefully, avoiding the wires. I love you, Dee Dee. Sandra's voice broke. I love you too, baby. The surgery took 6 hours. Edward sat in the waiting room the entire time. Vivian tried calling twice. He didn't answer. When the surgeon finally came out, Edward stood up so fast he knocked over his coffee. She's stable, strong. She'll make a full recovery. Edward dropped into the chair, hands covering his face. Thank God, thank God. Marcus was in a room 2 floors up. Edward visited him that afternoon. The kid was thin, pale, but his eyes were clear. Alive. You're Mr. Miller, Marcus said. I am. You hurt my sister. Edward nodded. I did. Marcus studied him for a long moment. She talks about your son like he's hers. I know. She almost died for him. I know. Marcus leaned back against his pillow. So, why'd you throw her away? Edward sat down slowly. Because I was scared. And stupid. And I let someone I trusted poison my judgment. Vivian. Edward looked up sharply. You know about her. Sandy told me everything. That woman's been making her life hell for months. Edward's jaw tightened. Not anymore. That evening, Edward returned home. Vivian was in the kitchen supervising dinner. She turned when she heard him, that same calm smile on her face. Mr. Miller, how is... You're fired. The smile faltered. Excuse me? You heard me. Pack your things. You have 1 hour. Vivian's expression hardened. You can't be serious. I've served this family for 23 years. You sabotaged Sandra. You deleted her medical appointments. You falsified her records. You planted that toy. Edward's voice was ice. And you watched her collapse with my son crying beside her, and you walked away. Vivian's face went white. I have the security footage, Edward said quietly. I have the IT logs. I have everything. That girl has been manipulating you. Her name is Sandra, and she saved my son's life while you tried to destroy hers. Edward pulled out his phone. 2 police officers walked through the door. Mrs. Crow, one of them said, we need you to come with us. We have some questions about the incident involving Julian Miller and Sandra Glover. Vivian's mask finally cracked. You're making a mistake. The only mistake I made, Edward said, was trusting you. They escorted her out. Edward stood in the empty kitchen, breathing hard. Amber appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. Mr. Miller, I didn't know. I know you didn't, but you'll need to leave too. She nodded, tears in her eyes. I'm sorry for everything. That night, Edward sat beside Sandra's hospital bed. She was awake, groggy from the anesthesia, but awake. Vivian's gone, he said quietly. Sandra closed her eyes. Good. I should have seen it sooner. You see it now. That's what matters. Edward reached for her hand, stopped himself. Can I? Sandra nodded. He took her hand gently. I don't know how to make this right, he said. You already did. Marcus is getting treatment. I'm getting better. That's everything. It's not everything. Sandra looked at him. Julian needs you, Edward said. And I think I do too. 6 months later. Sandra stood in the garden behind Edward's estate, watching Julian chase butterflies through the rose bushes. Marcus was beside her, hair growing back in soft curls, color returned to his cheeks. The treatment had worked. He was in remission. "I still can't believe this is real," Marcus said quietly. Sandra smiled. "Me neither." She'd moved into the garden house 2 months ago. Not as a nanny, not as an employee, as family. Edward had insisted. Separate space, full privacy, but close enough that Julian could run over whenever he wanted, which was every day. The boy had grown so much, talking more, laughing more. The fear in his eyes had finally faded. Every night, Sandra read him stories in the big house. Every morning, he knocked on her door asking if she wanted pancakes. She always said yes. Edward walked out, carrying a tray of lemonade. He'd changed too, softer somehow, present, like he'd finally figured out what mattered. "Julian, come get a drink," he called. The boy ran over, breathless and happy. "Dee Dee, did you see? I almost caught one." "I saw, baby. You were so close." Julian took his cup and ran back to the garden. Edward sat down beside Sandra and Marcus. "How are you feeling?" he asked Marcus. "Good, really good. Next checkup is Tuesday, right?" "Yeah, but the doctors aren't worried. They think it's really gone." Sandra reached over and squeezed her brother's hand. Edward had done that too, made sure Marcus got the best care, paid for everything, never asked for thanks, just did it. "I talked to my lawyer," Edward said, looking at Sandra, "about the guardianship papers." Sandra's heart skipped. "And? They're ready, if you still want to sign them. Co-guardianship of Julian, legal and permanent." "I want to," Sandra said softly. Edward smiled. "Good, because he asked me this morning if you were his family now. I told him yes. He said, 'Good, because I love her.'" Sandra's eyes filled with tears. That evening, after Julian was asleep, Sandra and Edward sat on the garden house porch. The stars were out. The air was cool. Everything felt quiet and right. "You know what I realized?" Edward said. "What?" "I spent 2 years with you in my house and never really saw you, not until I almost lost you." Sandra looked at him. "And now? Now I see you, and I'm grateful for everything." Sandra nodded slowly. "I used to wonder why God put me in that house, why he let me go through all that pain. And now? Now I think maybe it wasn't just about saving Julian. Maybe it was about saving all of us." Edward was quiet for a moment. "Your brother, my son, me, you." "Yeah." They sat there in comfortable silence, watching the lights in the main house. Inside, Julian slept peacefully. Marcus was healthy and whole. Vivian was gone, facing charges, no longer able to hurt anyone. And Sandra was finally safe. Not because someone rescued her, but because she'd rescued herself, by showing up, by choosing love over fear, by refusing to give up even when the world told her she didn't matter. "You know what Julian said to me yesterday?" Edward asked. "What?" he said. "Daddy, I'm glad Dee Dee came back. I was scared she wouldn't." Edward's voice cracked. "I told him she's never leaving again." Sandra reached over and took his hand. Not romantic, just human. Just two people who'd walked through fire and found something real on the other side. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, and she meant it. Somewhere above them, the stars kept shining, and in the quiet of that garden, 3 broken hearts became a family. Not perfect, not without scars, but together, and sometimes that's all grace needs to work with. They say angels come in many forms. Sometimes they wear uniforms and carry badges. Sometimes they wear scrubs and carry medicine. And sometimes, just sometimes, they wear quiet strength and carry love that refuses to quit. Sandra Glover was that kind of angel, the kind who shows up even when it costs everything, the kind who saves lives not because it's easy, but because it's right. And in the end, she didn't just save Julian Miller's life, she saved them all.